At this point, I got everything flattened to the tang, and my flats on the side of the scales are now flat too. Uh, Basically what I did was I went through with the 120 belt and just trued everything up. It didn't take much to get it flat to the tang because we already did that before we glued it up. This next point is going to be using the small wheel to kind of A, clean this gunk up in here, but then B, we're going to start to form our finger divots, the nice little contoured parts here that make it comfortable. And I like to do that part first when I'm starting my handles because it'll let me return to the knife to just keep holding it to see how much I want to take away. As of right now, having those hard corners here, it makes it really, really uncomfortable. So I feel like doing this area first, not only A, because it's the hardest part, but it'll help down the road too in the process. The reason I call this part the hard part is because I generally shoot myself in the foot and put some G10 right in the radius of the small wheel. The small wheel is about 3/4 of an inch, and as it goes in here, it wants to get stuck. So I'll be working at an angle, and this harder stuff will kind of push the grinder off, and it'll get stuck into the softer material, which is the wood or the true stone here. It's just, I'd say, a good beginner tip to not put your G10 up near a small radius. Put it in the back. The bigger wheels or the flat plate, there's no problem with it at all. But like I said, that little wheel likes to kind of shimmy off the harder stuff and get stuck into the softer things. So I'm going to keep an eye out for. I also went ahead and picked off my glue here, and like I said before, it came off super easy. I just went in there with something sharp and chipped it away. Any kind of gunk that's left over, i.e. this wax, or maybe there's some just chippy residue kind of stuff stuck in there from the wax, that's where I like to use the vulcanized paper. It's nice and rigid, but it's not hard enough to scratch anything. So you can really get it in there and just kind of push all the goop away. So next step is going to be starting to form the handle shape, and I'll reposition the camera, and maybe I'll do a voiceover to kind of describe what I'm doing before. But like I said, it's really something you're just going to have to get your hands on and figure out how to do this for yourself. My first goal is going to be thinning out the front of the handle here so it's less tapered as is the tang. I want to basically get this flat, but I even like the front part to be thinner than the back, so I'm going to take a little bit of grinding to get that done. So let's get to it. We are now in the home stretch. I've done all the rough grinding on the grinder with a 36 grit belt, and then I went through and I cleaned up all my my spine with the 120 because that is the belt that, or the pad that we're going to use next. So I'm sure there's some knife makers out there that are cringing right now that I'm going to use a random orbital sander to shape this knife. But I've gotten really used to this tool. I'm not sure if anybody else uses one. I find it's quite helpful with the nice soft but firm pad to ride into the contours and help smooth everything out. It gives it an organic feel to it. I mean, that could be a word to describe something sloppily done and uneven and whatever. I get good results on my sander. I'm gonna get my flats back, and it all comes down to hand sanding, and at the end, this is just gonna take out 90% of the workload, and after all, this is a hand sander, right? So it's gonna count as hand sanding. Yeah. Well, anyways, you still have to be careful with this thing. It does chew some material, especially on the 120, which I'm gonna use to my advantage. We'll clean everything up. This little tool is super awesome for getting in these holes and taking the burrs out. Let's start with that. But I'm gonna get a 120, 220, 400, 800, and 800 is what's on here now. As you can see, it is not easy on your sander. You can blow out the edges where I'm gonna ride in here, and it tends to get stuck. I go through a new pad every month or two. For 20 bucks, it's well worth the time that it saves me on grinding these. So I will probably have to reposition the camera and we'll get going. Side note, quick thing, I almost forgot again. You may have noticed that there's now aluminum tape on the blade, and that's for an oops here and there. It's really helpful on the grinder, but with a 36 grit belt, you get one oops, and you're lucky if you got that one, and then it'll tear through the tape and eat into your blade. On the random orbital sander, this puny aluminum tape for air ducts is going to save us a lot of headaches when I get to round my guard over and I can just land the blade right on the sandpaper and not have to worry about it tearing up the finish. So I'm going to get going on this, and we're just going to fast forward through everything, as this is a very long and drawn out process, and then we'll get to the hand sanding and finishing process after that. Exciting. So here we have the full process. I'm just going to have to go back and do that again with the 200, the 400, and then the 800. And every time between the grits, so going from a 120 to a 220, I'm actually going to go over to the grinder and hit the spines again with a 300 grit belt. And the reason I'm going to go higher than step back down is the belts on the grinder are specifically made to cut metal. These are just standard PSA sanding discs. They do really well for the wood, and sure, it'll scratch up and cut the metal, but it's not going to get in there nearly as aggressively as the belts will. So by staying ahead of the sanding pad with the grinder, it just saves me a whole lot of time cleaning up the metal on the back, and we want that to be flawless too. So I'm going to go ahead and, well, here, let me give you a little spray down preview. At this point, it's looking pretty darn near finished, and I was really happy that some of this green got eaten away. There's just enough of it left in there to really make the True Stone pop. It's kind of a gamble when you work with those double-dyed scales. You don't know what it's going to look like on the inside. That piece you have might have a whole different feel to it when you start grinding it. So It's something to just be aware of when you're working with burls, especially when they're dyed. You have no idea what it's going to look like when it's actually shaped up. I've even had empty spots on the inside, and that can kind of be cool too. If you have a really bright color like a green or a blue and you had a dead spot on the inside of it, the natural tones will start to leak back out, and enough of the wood is stabilized that the structural integrity is there, but you get to have a nice relief of some natural wood tones bleeding through. This piece got color everywhere throughout, so pretty darn happy with how it's coming out so far. I will come back when we're ready to actually start doing more hand stuff. So it's going to be the same process I just did with the 120, but over and over and over again. Each grade is actually a little bit faster, but they take time nonetheless. So I will let you go, and I'll come back here with a polished up handle.